Alright, I just remembered that I probably did wet sand the little piston of because it had scratches on it, but I don't think I sanded the inside wall here, so I'm gonna go ahead and take this all out again and then try to wet sand that wall. Basically, you're just gonna push this down to relieve the pressure, and then with the other hand you're gonna pull out this pick. You might need to rotate this to help you get this circlip out. So the first thing that I tried was pushing this down and then pushing one edge of the circlip, trying to rotate it so that I can line this up with this access right here. So hopefully I can get it out without stabbing my finger. Okay, so I've got So I'm gonna push this in. Actually, I'm gonna use one hand, maybe that's easier. They don't make this easy. Okay, I got circlip out. So this is the retainer. The spring. And to get this piston out, I'm gonna just use my finger or my thumb. Okay, so yeah, it looks like I wet sanded here, and I'll verify it. I might want to wet sand it a little bit more. Yeah, because I can feel these bumps. But what I'm going to do is, what I forgot to do is get some wet sandpaper, tear up a piece, and then use my finger to sand here, make sure it's smooth. I'll double check, actually yeah, I'll just double check it with this. Okay, so I can feel some scoring here. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. Yeah, I feel some scoring here too. So I'll go ahead and do that with either, actually I think I'm going to do it with oil, just in case, because I don't want to wait till this dries before I put everything back together. Before I sand this, since this is the new O-ring, I'm going to take this O-ring off so I don't damage it. To show you how I'm doing it, I've already sanded the piston, but what I didn't show before was I put oil on here on a piece of wet sandpaper, and then I'm putting it in here. Making sure that it goes all the way to the bottom, and then I'm just gonna try to sand it. And the main point is I need to knock off all the high spots that all the hard spots that were in there. I mean, the scratches will still be there, but knocking off the high spots will make it a lot better for that piston to go up and down in its bore. Okay, so I sanded the bore in there, and then I sprayed some brake clean and actually held this upside down to make sure that stuff didn't get inside that hole. And then I cleaned out with a paper towel. So also, another thing that I did was I removed this tube or pipe here. That way I could sand it easier. So I'm just going to go ahead and put the pipe back in. It's a long pipe. Just vibrate it back in. So this is clean. Just install the O-ring back onto the little piston, put everything back together. So the O-ring is back on the piston, and then I'm just going to lubricate it. Okay, once that's back on, and I was using water, so I dried it all off, and then I sprayed brake cleaner and then dried that off. So just gonna use my thumb because it seems to fit pretty good. And then also I'm gonna lubricate these walls. Okay. Actually, you don't need your thumb. Just trying to not get the O-ring cut on here. I'm going in like a circular motion to kind of just vibrate the O-ring in without getting it all bound up. Then I'll just add some more lubricant. Okay, that sound obviously means it bottomed out. So spring, retainer, and then I just gotta push this down and put the circlip back in. Let's see. I don't know why they make these things so hard. Okay, I think that's in. I'm just gonna check everything around here. It actually hurts my thumb. Just pushing everything down, making sure that's in. And that looks good. And then also would want to rotate it so the end is here and the other end is here, which it is. So, yep, there we go. We're going to replace this bearing and the seal that's on the other side. Here's the part for the bearing. I think that says 003 at the end. That's the part number. And when I was spraying this with acid cleaner, it looks like it destroyed the bearing because it's really rough now. Or maybe that's just rust that might go away if it keeps spinning for a while. But I'm gonna go ahead and replace it. So here's the new bearing. And yeah, it's a lot smoother. And this feels really, really bad. Feels really gritty. And you can actually hear it. And I do see that this says Japan on it. And this, I don't see the writing on this side. So first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to knock out the bearing. Going to knock out this rubber seal there. So just going to go ahead and use a flathead and knock that out. I'm going to take out this pipe. And I'm just going to see if I can just use the back of my hand to knock this out. So the kit I'm going to use is called Go Plus, and I forgot what the other name was because I think they changed their name to something else, but basically that's what the kit looks like. And you just pick the right bit, which I picked this bit, and when you screw this in, this tip will expand out. So that tip right there is going to expand out when the screw gets pushed into it. And then I screwed the bit that I chose into the hammer, the slide hammer. And so basically how it works is we're gonna just put the, because I couldn't get, there's like no there's no grip in there with my flathead, so I'm gonna put this in here. And I'm going to hold this. I'm going to hold this piece while I spin this into it. Alright, so you can't really tell there, but it expanded in its hole. And all I have to do now is just hammer this thing out. I really can't bend this pipe, so I'm gonna try to set up the camera again at a different angle. Okay, so I've got it set up like that, and I'm just gonna try to slide hammer this thing out. And it is coming out. Okay, so you can see that's how it expands out and into the bearing, or in this case the seal, just like that. And that's how I was able to slide hammer this out. So go ahead and show this part. I damage the inner race of this, trying to smash out the bearing, because I thought I was actually hitting on the bearing to smash it out, but I wasn't. So the bearing sat on this side, and it was that bearing. Well, this is the new one. The old one is the same one. So it was sitting in here, and what I was doing is I put a block of wood under here, and then I smashed out the bearing from this side. But see, the problem is I was actually hitting on that race, and you see how it's missing a chunk? That's because I was smashing right through that race, thinking I was hitting on the bearing, but I wasn't. So what you actually have to do to get that bearing out is use a puller. So what I have to do now is replace this entire end cover, and it's like $230. So I'll see if I can get a close up. Okay, you can see that race right there. That looks good until you see that there's a huge chunk missing there. And so that's just something that I'm going to try not to do. I thought I knew what I was doing, but I didn't. Okay, I'm going to replace all these circlips. And what I did was I grabbed onto here and I pushed it in, and I was able to just force it out. So I've got 3 here, and all I'm gonna need to do is probably just match up the size. This is too big, so it should be this one. And yeah, this seems like a fit, so for this hole right here, it's this part number. Okay, so here's the new part. And I don't really know how it's gonna go in here. I think I'll see if I can just force it. Yeah, it looks like you can just force it. Yep. That was actually really easy. Right, so here's the new bearing. And the reason why I've got 3 here is, here's the old one, and they're really loose. This sounds okay. You can hear that the bottom part sounds kind of loose, but I think that's normal for some reason. And I bought 2 of these off Amazon because they were cheap, and they are OEM, but they don't sound that good. This one actually sounds okay. I could use it, and it does say, it says NSK RKE. So NSK is a pretty good brand. But then I bought this one off Majestic. So this one also says NSK RKE. Okay, so I hold this and spin the bottom, and whichever sounds smoother. I can't do it with one hand, but this side sounded smoother this way, and it sounded rougher this way. So I'm using this as the top side. And so this is the inside of the case, so the top side points this way, and I think it goes in this way easier. So lubricated this bore, lubricated the outside of this, and I'm going to try to push it in from the bottom. And yeah, it is sliding in a lot easier from the bottom. And we're going to stake these. So first I'm going to turn it around. I'm going to try to explain to you why this is actually the most difficult thing I've ever had to do on any car. These circlips, if they had holes in both of them so that you can actually position them while you spread them out, this would be way easier. But for some reason these don't have any holes, and the problem with it is you have to not only spread these out, but it also has to center on the bearing. So you need somebody to do that and somehow push the bearing in. Because if you try to spread this right here, I don't know so you can see the bottom, but it pushes up, and so you'll never get this centered while you try to push the bearing in. Circlip will just block you from getting this bearing through. And so I tried and tried for hours, and the only thing I could do was I folded a piece of cardboard or piece of plastic here, so this circlip would be pushed down more while I try to spread it out. And then I had to use the same trick that I've been using, is the threaded rod. And so I used the threaded rod through there and this thing. So while I did that, and then I would try to open this and center it, and then I would start cranking on that. So it would jam there, and then I would center this, and the level of difficulty is easily a 10 for just no good reason. So here's the setup that I have. Still haven't cut this rod, and make sure you don't hit the bearing because this is a raised bearing, so don't hit that. So it's pushing up on the circlip, so I may have to loosen the tension. But the other side is one of the ball joint adapters, the black thing, and it fits exactly around there. You're not pushing this, you don't have to push it in all the way right now, so right now it doesn't matter that this adapter is just slightly smaller than the bearing, because yeah, anyways, this washer here, and then here's a coupler nut. And so I'm basically, to start it, it's really hard to see, but the circlip, I made sure that it's outside of the bearing on the bottom, and so I can manipulate this top circlip by spreading it, because I just want to make sure that this bottom circlip doesn't go past the bearing, because then it will block it. Loosen it because the circlip got jammed. So you start by making sure that the bottom of the circlip is outside, like not trying to block the bearing but outside of it, and so it'll kind of trap it on the bottom. And on the top, what you can do is start manipulating this, pushing this out here and here, and then tighten it a little bit more on using both hands, tighten it a little bit more, and then manipulating this. What you're trying to do is you're trying to trap the bottom of the circlip while you spread it a little bit and then tighten it, because when you tighten it, it'll, as long as you're centering the circlip, it'll spread it out due to the pressure. And so you're just gonna keep also trying to spread it out here just tiny bit. So like I said, without this trick, the level of difficulty of getting that circlip to go around the bearing while it goes into its bore is easily the hardest thing I've ever had to do. Just tighten it little by little, and I'm actually using these to spread it out a little bit, and then I just keep tightening it more and then spreading it more. It's just really slow, but other than this, there's no other way I could figure out how to get this to not jam up while the bearing is going through. What's happened here is I've gotten it to the point where the circlip is fully outside of the bearing, and I'm just gonna lock it in with this wrench while I turn it from the inside. So the bearing should be able to also make sure this doesn't hit the bearing, because I actually did go over to the bearing. All I should have to do now is basically screw this bearing in just slowly, and it looks like it's actually it's kind of crooked in the back. Okay, I need to loosen this and center this first. I actually need to hold a wrench here with one hand while I spin another wrench here, but it is going in just slowly. And this bearing is actually its groove is actually right in the center, the middle, right there. So it doesn't matter which side. That's why I picked the best side. These two have different grooves. Like one is at the near top and the other one's at the near bottom. And I think what's going to happen is I'm going to hear a snap once the circlip hits that center groove. I don't know if you can see, but here, that bearing is coming straight up. And there, that's the sound of the circlip snapping into place. So everything's good. Now the problem with all these bearings is they spin in their bore. So we're going to stake it, but before I do that, I'm going to remove this bearing because it sits not flush with the case. And so when I turn this around and try to hammer it from the other side, I don't want to damage this bearing. This one spins, this one spins. This one spins the least, but it does spin. So for this setup, I'm going to push it through this way. And this thing, it's not centered now, but it's going to push on the outer race. And the thing is, the outer race is raised up from the middle race. So I think that's on purpose, so you don't damage this bearing. So it's going to be centered around the outer race, and it's small enough to fit through. And for the other side, we have a giant cup with an adapter plate. So it'll be able to go through here, and it's just gonna, this cup is gonna catch it, but its lip is gonna touch on the outside, so it won't be touching the bearing at all. It's just, it provides a space for the bearing to go through. I just kept making sure that this cup was centered, and the circlip kept getting jammed, so I kept having to loosen this. And then once I did, I got the circlips and I spread it, and then I centered this again, and it just kept jamming, so I just kept doing it. But eventually what happened was I did it slowly, and then I spread this, centered this, centered this, centered the back, and eventually the circlips are actually holding open, because that means it went outside and past the groove. And so now I should be able to just crank on this and push the bearing through. And I'll make sure everything's good and not binding, and then I'll put my wrench on here. I still haven't gotten this off, and I think this might be the right way to do it. But basically I spread the circlip, made sure this is centered, and then I peeked under here to make sure that the bottom cup is centered. But once I see that the circlips are spreading and staying open by themselves, I think that means it's safely around or outside of its groove. So I think all I need to do is just keep pushing it down, but I'm really nervous because it's putting up a lot of tension here, and I don't want to break anything. I've already broken the end plate cover, so I'm trying not to break anything else tonight. I think why I had so many problems with this thing binding is because these things are too big and it was getting stuck, and it was opening wide but just not quite wide enough, and I just shoved these in here, and I could get it, maybe I'm just getting it just like the tiniest bit wider with these, but right now it seems like it wants to push through. So if you have a lot of binding even with the wrench, just stop, because you might damage something. So I'm going to try to hold this center while I use the wrench and twist this and clamp it through. But like I said, make sure that you don't have excessive binding, because that probably means that you're caught on the circlip. Okay, so I found out the trick to when it starts binding is get a flathead here and then hammer it here, and what happens is there's tension on here and it's stuck, and so when you hammer it outwards, it somehow jumps the groove, and then it just pops the bearing up. So I've actually been doing this for hours. It's ridiculous how poorly designed that they made these circlips.